They are the world's tallest trees, the stuff of which legends are made. Timeless wonders, home to an astonishing variety of plants and animals. They are the redwoods, America's big trees. Each year, millions of people visit Northern California's redwoods. They come to hike, to fish, to simply relax and enjoy. Whether it's a secluded grove or a popular attraction, the redwoods have something for everyone. How big is a redwood? The biggest are more than 360 feet tall. That's taller than a football field is long. As high as a 20 or even 30-story building, taller than the Statue of Liberty, even twice as high as Niagara Falls.
Just walking amongst these trees, you're seeing some of the tallest. They're within, 2 or so feet of being the tallest tree in the world.
You can enjoy some of the top contenders during a walk through Founders Grove in Humboldt Redwood State Park. The grove is named for the founders of the Save the Redwoods League. And the focal point on this short loop trail is the majestic Founders Tree.
Well, a tree this size could be anywhere from, 500 years to maybe 2,000 years old. It depends on how much water and how much light it's had in its lifetime and how much growth it puts on each year for a tree to get this huge. This is a pretty huge one.
And it's part of a family of remarkable trees.
On 3, you have to say tree. 1, 2, 3.
Experts take frequent measurements of the tallest redwoods because the tallest trees don't always stay that way. Sometimes lightning strikes and knocks 10 or 15 feet off their tops. Or a tree gets so big that it can't transport water all the way from its roots to its highest branches. So its crown slowly dies. One tall tree held a record through the mid-1990s. It checked in with a height of 367 feet. But then, the top died back. Now another tree holds the record, for a while at least. Redwoods are not just tall, they're big. The trunks of some of these trees could hold a Greyhound bus. Few trees can rival the spectacular dimensions of the redwood, or its close cousin, the giant sequoia. Redwoods are mighty trees, but by comparison, their seeds and cones are extremely puny. State Parks volunteer Gene Wright spends a lot of his summer telling visitors about this study in contrasts.
These particular seeds come from an extremely large tree, and they're very, very small. There's usually about 80 to, maybe 100 seeds in a cone, and the cones themselves are very small. Most people come into the visitor center and they'll say, what is this? It can't be a pine cone. And we'll say, no, of course it's not. It's a redwood cone. And then they'll want to know why that other trees have such large cones and the redwood tree has such small cones. And of course the answer is that's what the redwood tree does. It likes small cones.
The foliage varies widely according to its location on the tree. Higher up, the leaves are more like scales. Lower down, they're softer and more open. It's because the branches and their foliage have different functions.
For example, this foliage from the very top of the tree is not necessarily doing very much up there because there's plenty of sunlight. It doesn't have to open up. This down at the bottom of the tree, it has to open up so that the sun will stream in and it can utilize it. But the top branches don't have to do that, so they look more like a scale than they do a leaf. The cones that we looked at grow more on the tops of the trees in the upper regions, and the bottoms of the trees have very few bearing cones.
During the drought or flood years, trees often up their seed output to ensure survival of the species. But the seeds, which are about the same size as a tomato seed or a small grain of rice, have a tough time growing into mature trees. It's literally a 1 in a million chance. not enough sun, not enough moisture, too much harsh weather. A lot of things get in the way of germination.
Seeds are, they like a better climate than that to work with, whereas the redwood tree doesn't care that much about it. They go ahead and reproduce trees from their root collar burl.
In fact, only 1 out of 5 redwoods started from seeds. This adaptable tree can overcome all sorts of adversity and turn it into an opportunity for growth. Unlike a lot of conifers, redwood stumps produce all sorts of sprouts after cutting. They can reach a decent size after only a few years, but it's often pretty crowded in their neighborhood. Redwood sprouts can be temperamental. Most do best when they grow only a short distance from their parent tree. But they still like to have an open canopy because they thrive on sunlight. And once these sprouts get going, they grow fast. Some stand 130 feet high after only 30 years, 170 feet high after a half a century. But a tree's size does not always indicate its age. Some crowded sprouts are only an inch in diameter after 3 decades of growth. And then there are the burls that grow on the mature redwood trunks. Fascinating growths that are almost like a benign cancer. Burls are masses of stem tissue. Sometimes when a tree sustains an injury, the burls develop. Burls can develop more than 100 feet above the forest floor, and at maturity the largest might weigh several tons. But all share a common characteristic. When the redwood is affected by a drought or fire, the burls respond to the trauma by sprouting new growth, often providing a second life for a badly damaged tree. The burls, with their fascinating growth patterns, are popular items at gift shops. They're made into bowls and tables. You can even buy a small burl, then take it home and water it. Maybe sprout a miniature redwood forest in your own living room.
Most people don't know what they are. They don't understand that they're a live, living thing. They think that they're just like what you would see we'd make the clocks out of and such, just a slab of a burl. But these are actually living things. They are plants. Only one in about 800 to 1,000 will actually get a root system and grow into a tree. We don't encourage people to think that they're going to get a tree when they buy one of these. Normally they will be just like a regular house plant, a conversation piece.
If you're choosing a burl, look for one that's pretty solid.
Nice hard one that's firm, one that's got a little bit of the nubs and the little sprouts that you'll see growing out of it here. That's what you're going to want to look for, is a little bit of growth already. If it's soft, you don't want it.
For all their size, redwoods are not all that firmly planted in the ground. Unlike a lot of trees, they don't have a taproot, which means they can topple relatively easily.
You can see the root systems of these trees are very shallow, 4 to 10 feet on the average down into the ground, and then they spread out radially around the tree for hundreds of feet, and they connect with one another, so they actually help to hold one another up. But when one falls out of the canopy, that will weaken the neighboring trees as their root systems are connected.
That's just what happened back in 1991 when one of the world's largest trees, the Dyerville giant, toppled. The giant, another resident of Founders Grove, weighed an estimated 100,000 pounds and left a massive mark on the landscape. The week before it fell, a nearby tree went over.
Yeah, people always ask, well, was it because of windstorm? No, it was primarily very soggy soil, and one tree fell, and it was kind of like what we call a domino effect, with the tree's root systems being intertwined and being affected by one another, and one falling, then another falling, and then another falling against another, and it caused quite a mess. It looked like a bomb had gone off. There was mud everywhere and not a whole lot of vegetation, a lot of splintered wood, but nature makes a comeback rather quickly. I've heard them fall, but I've never seen one fall. They do make a loud noise, but I maybe wouldn't really want to be around when one fell.
That domino effect of intertwined root systems can create a precarious situation during severe floods or windstorms. But those trees that remain standing have amazing powers of recovery. They often grow new roots and sections of roots to replace damaged areas or to get around the silts deposited by high waters. Perhaps that's one reason that the Latin name for redwoods is Sequoia sempervirens, or Sequoia ever-living. Time after time, redwoods recover from conditions that would kill less hardy trees, sending out new sprouts and roots, even when the main trunk is dying. Old-growth forests contain a rich mix of standing trees that are 200 years or older, a multi-layered canopy, and nutrients from downed trees and other sources. The soil and other debris surrounding these roots is remarkable in its own way. A typical acre of redwood forest contains more organic matter than anywhere on Earth. The mix of soil, leaves, branches, bits of bark, and the redwoods themselves can add up to 1,800 tons per acre. That's 8 times more than a typical acre of South American rainforest. All of that nutrition contributes to some healthy growth rates. A large redwood can grow by as much as 2,000 board feet per year. An acre dotted with 80-year-old trees contains enough timber to construct 20 average American homes, and they produce enough new wood every 5 years to build an additional home. Author John Steinbeck wrote, "The redwoods, once seen, leave a mark or create a vision that stays with you always. It's not only their unbelievable stature, nor the color, which seems to shift and vary under your eyes. No, they're not like any tree we know. They are ambassadors of another time." Redwoods literally span the ages. Many of the oldest standing trees sprouted 1,500, even 2,000 years ago. Experts believe some living trees might be close to 2,500 years old. Check out this cross-section outside the Humboldt State Park Visitor Center. You can match some of the rings to great events in human civilization, or just step back and say to yourself, "Wow, that's really big." When you walk through the redwoods, you'll sometimes notice a tree with a hole in it. You can walk right into the trunk.
Well, these burnt out hollows, we call them goose pens because the early settlers used to keep chickens and geese in them. But they're the result of many fires, not just one fire burning a hole in the tree like that. It's a fire will come along, burn through the bark a little bit, and then, that fire goes out. Another fire comes along, burns a hole. There's hundreds of years of fires moving through these forests before they even became parkland. The reason the trees can still be alive is because the very center of the tree is the heartwood, and it's actually dead wood. And the outer layer just around the heartwood is called sapwood, just inside the bark. That's where the fluids are conducted, and if that's intact, the tree can still take in water and nutrients and sustain its life.
And it's really pretty tough to burn a redwood.
They lack true resin, so that makes them a little bit less flammable, and then their bark can be almost a foot thick on some of the older trees.
When exposed to heat and flames, that thick bark often chars into something of a heat shield. Fire plays a complex role in redwood forests. It can kill young or vulnerable trees, but it can also enhance growth and germination throughout the groves. Remember those tiny redwood seeds? 9 out of 10 never get a chance to sprout. But fires can actually improve their chances of germination by burning away the shady underbrush and exposing the bare soil to nourishing rays of sunlight. Fire also leaves layers of ash, which can add nutrients to the forest floor. Fires often encourage growth in redwoods' roots and stumps. This sort of sprouting happens quickly after a trauma, usually within 2 weeks. And that gives foresters and researchers a more precise way of estimating the dates of historic fires and other catastrophes in the West's redwood groves. Redwoods get their name from their distinctive reddish-colored bark. The red comes from a concentration of tannins, a substance that makes the tree resistant to rot and insects. The tannic acid is unpleasant, so most insects and fungi do not attack live trees. They prefer to live in dead or damaged trees, which contain fewer tannins. In fact, only 6 types of insects are known to attack redwoods. far fewer than those that attack most other trees. Early builders took advantage of the redwood's natural defenses, using it on the exteriors of homes and buildings to discourage infestations by termites and ants. In a sense, it was gold that sparked a hunger for lumber in the coastal redwoods. In 1848, discovery of gold in California brought wave after wave of fortune hunters to the region. All of those prospectors, and the people who made their money off the prospectors, needed places to live and do business. In 1849, there were only 10 operating sawmills in the territory, and they could cut only about 5 million board feet per year. In San Francisco and other California boom towns, the cry went out for trees. California became a state in 1850. The very next year, organized logging began in the redwood country. The trees defied the imagination. The trunks of some of these giants could fill a city street curb to curb. Burly loggers could stand arms outstretched and measure trunk diameters of 25 feet. A single redwood could weigh 500 tons. When these giants were logged, the crack of the falling trees and the concussion as they struck the ground could be heard for miles. Some of these massive trunks yielded up to 360,000 board feet of lumber. That's enough for a 5.5-acre redwood deck. Trees that big were a challenge to move. It could take loggers up to 2 weeks to fell, limb, and buck a single tree into manageable pieces of timber. You'd start by sawing a 10-foot trunk into 8-foot lengths. Those might be split into ties, with leftovers turned into posts and stakes. Crews built skid roads and used horses and oxen to haul chunks of timber out of the hills to the mills on the valley floors. Much of the wood made its way to Fields Landing on the south side of the city of Eureka. By 1853, journal entries recorded more than 100 ships had left Humboldt Bay with a cargo totaling 200 million board feet. By 1876, the shipping traffic had increased by a factor of 10. The harvest of lumber was dubbed Sequoia Gold. Railroads came into the area in the 1870s. Each mile of track opened more and more acres to logging. But just getting the tracks into the woods was a challenge. A lot of the early lumber went into railroad ties and elaborate trestles to bridge gullies and smooth, steep grades. Log trains became a familiar sight along the Northern California tracks. A single tree could fill an entire train. In the 1880s, technological improvements allowed loggers to process the trees more quickly, getting prime lumber to market to help build a growing state and a growing nation. Steam donkeys arrived in the redwoods in 1882. Mills, once an occasional sight in the redwoods, became increasingly common. They created hundreds of jobs. In 1914, Northern Pacific completed the link between Eureka and Sausalito, providing a direct rail connection between the redwood timberlands and the San Francisco Bay. From 1953 till 1976, logging and mill operations produced and processed more than 1 billion board feet per year. And specialized nurseries began to flourish, producing seedlings for the next generation of timber harvests. Crews took to the slopes to plant the young trees and to create a future market for second-growth timber. These days, nurseries produce more than 4.5 million redwood seedlings annually. Redwoods flourish along 500 miles of the Northern California and Southern Oregon coasts, from Big Sur to just north of the town of Brookings. To the west lies the Pacific Ocean, a source of vast moisture. Wet winds drop close to 70 inches of rain annually, bathing these giants with nourishing moisture. The more water, the faster these great trees grow. The rain pools and courses across the landscape, creating picturesque creeks. In some places, the trickle becomes a torrent and then a cataract as it plunges downhill. And while much of the redwood's water comes from rain, another source of moisture is the region's frequent clouds and fog. Even if it never reaches the ground, it is absorbed by the multi-layered canopy of the trees. Summer clouds and fog saturate the redwoods. This is a dynamic landscape reliant on the daily fluctuations of mist and moisture. Eastern slopes are drier, western slopes are wetter, but both benefit from the waves of fog that roll in from the coast. Many redwoods are so immense that they reach up through as many as 3 microclimates. Conditions are moist and shady at the base of the trees. There's a transition zone in the middle, and things are frequently more dry and more windy at the tops. But every few years, it gets cold enough to snow and stick throughout their range. And visitors are treated to a winter picture of redwoods frosted with white. The frequent rains soak the forests and fill nearby rivers. And every now and then, they trigger some big floods. The locals still talk about the floods of 1955 and of 1964.
This is the Darrowville Bridge the afternoon before it went out.
Dave Stockton is one of them.
And then across at the other fork, the railroad bridge went out, took the solid pier and 2 sections and tipped them over. This was Myers Flat. In the back you can see the giant tree. This is what most of Highway 101 looked like after this mud has been bulldozed off of the sides of the road. And every time it rained, it would all come back in.
The tales of the floods and of other harsh weather bind friends and family in a common narrative. And despite the occasional inundation and property damage, folks like Dave Stockton keep things in perspective. They wouldn't live anyplace else, and it sure makes for interesting pictures.
This is the hurricane of '78. A little bit more severe than the one in Columbus Day storm in '62, 100-mile-an-hour winds. But this tree fell and caught itself in the crotch and shattered just like fine hair. And it was just almost ornamental. And then in 1997, we didn't have a flood, we call it a high water. And it got in Founders Grove restroom. And it was real neat because when I took this picture, some people just went and took Founders Grove Trail in a canoe.
And most of the time, the rivers stay well within their banks. It's one of the reasons people come to the Redwoods, a fine spot to fish or just to while away the hours watching the current. Up until the end of the 1700s, many of Northern California's coastal valleys were carpeted with majestic stands of redwoods. But the timber attracted settlers and loggers to the region. In 1879, the Timber and Stone Act authorized the sale of federal lands for $2.50 per acre. Private interests began buying up thousands of acres of redwood timberlands and turning the trees into profitable lumber. But as more and more of the trees began to fall, public awareness rose, and so did conservation efforts. In 1908, President Teddy Roosevelt established Muir Woods National Monument. The original acreage was purchased by Congressman William Kent, who wanted to protect one of the San Francisco Bay Area's remaining stands of virgin redwood. It was Kent who suggested naming the site for naturalist John Muir. Today, Muir Woods covers 560 acres of forest and beach. A decade later, the Save the Redwoods League was born. Its mission? To protect more of the region's magnificent redwood forests. The League's organizers visited the groves near the town of Wiyot in 1917. In 1921, the League made the first of several purchases of what would become Humboldt Redwood State Park. 2 years later, officials established Prairie Creek Redwoods Park. In 1925, another park, Del Norte Coast Redwoods, came into being. The 1920s closed with the dedication of Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, near the Oregon-California border. Today, places like Humboldt Redwoods, with its 32-mile Avenue of the Giants, are jewels in the Golden States Park system. Humboldt is California's third-largest state park, covering more than 51,000 acres. And it's an example of some intense public and private conservation efforts. In 1930, for example, John D. Rockefeller donated $2 million to the League. The money helped purchase 10,000 acres along Bull Creek to protect it from logging. Today, the drive through Rockefeller Forest is the highlight of many a redwoods visit. As you walk and drive through Humboldt Redwood State Park, you'll encounter more than 100 memorial groves. Many were acquired with the help of private donations of either cash or land. As early as 1911, the federal government studied creation of a national park in the Redwoods. The research and recommendations continued into the early 1920s, but lost steam during the Depression and the war years. In 1961, the Save the Redwoods League, Sierra Club, and National Geographic Society revived the effort. In 1968, the dream became a reality. Redwood National Park was established on 58,000 acres of federal and state lands. 10 years later, the park added another 48,000 acres. The national park, along with Prairie Creek, Del Norte, and Jedediah Smith State Parks, are designated as a World Heritage Site and as an International Biosphere Reserve. The redwoods are more than just tall trees. In fact, you'll find close to 900 plant species in this region. And the forests are full of animals. More than 200 species of birds and bugs, mammals and amphibians. These creatures come in all sizes, and many are easy to spot. Some of the most majestic animals in the redwoods are the Roosevelt elk. These stately creatures are the largest elk in the Northwest and the second largest member of the deer family, right behind the moose. They get their name from President Teddy Roosevelt, who worked hard to protect the species from overhunting and extinction almost a century ago. These are fascinating animals. The males or bulls mature in 4 years, developing a massive spread of antlers, usually with 5 or more points. Females or cows don't grow antlers. But in the winter, when some of the bulls drop theirs, it's sometimes tough to tell the two apart from a distance. The elk are fond of the Northwest's wet terrain, especially near coastal forests. So it's no surprise that they thrive in the redwoods. You'll often find them along scenic drives in the Redwood National and State Parks. Many spots in Prairie Creek redwoods have pullouts for easy viewing as you travel along the Newton B. Drury Scenic Parkway or the road to Gold Bluffs Beach. Roosevelt elk often weigh between 800 and 1,200 pounds, and at the shoulder can stand 4.5 or 5 feet high. So you don't want to approach them on foot. Bulls are especially protective during the fall mating season known as the rut. Cows are especially protective of their calves during the spring and summer. The calves and even the yearlings can get pretty frisky in the spring. During the spring, the adults shed their heavy 2-layered winter coats. The shorter inner layer keeps them warm. The longer outer layer protects them from the Northwest's persistent rains. From large to small, the redwoods are filled with all sorts of interesting critters. Perhaps the most popular is the banana slug. The banana slug is the world's second largest slug. It grows anywhere from 6 to 10 inches long and can weigh up to 1/4 pound. They're named for their yellow color, but you'll find them in shades ranging from black to white, even pale brown and mossy greens. There are probably more banana slugs than redwoods in these forests, and they perform a valuable function. Banana slugs are known as decomposers. They dine off the plant debris and recycle the material into soil for the forest floor. As they make their slimy way along the ground, they'll often unknowingly pick up seeds and spores, which are then spread to another spot for sprouting. In the redwoods, slugs are an important part of the forests and the parks. Please don't handle or hurt them. They help provide valuable soil and nutrients for the nearby trees. Instead, spend a few moments just watching these unusual creatures as they make their way along the forest floor. And remember to watch your step. Up in the trees, you might spot one of the hundreds of species of birds that call the redwoods home. The woods, prairies, and beaches are filled with wildlife, ranging from bear and cougar to rabbit and squirrel. You can get a closer look inside one of the many park visitor centers, including this wildlife diorama at Humboldt Redwood State Park. Or if you step outside near dusk, you just might catch a glimpse of one of the resident wild turkeys. Just offshore are all sorts of marine life, including bright orange starfish. During certain times of the year, you might even spot a gray whale. All along the Northern California coast, you can stop to admire the pounding surf that helps make this such a special place. Here, the redwoods meet the sea. One of the area's most beautiful hikes lies in the shadow of the redwoods just a short distance from the ocean, in Prairie Creek Redwood State Park. Welcome to Fern Canyon. Fern Canyon is named for the lush variety of ferns that carpet these 60-foot high walls. Five-finger fern, sword fern, bracken fern, along with all sorts of other plants. Here, the air is filled with moisture. Fern Canyon, and much of the land surrounding it, was owned for years by the Pacific Lumber Company. It was donated to the California Park System via the Save the Redwoods League, as part of an effort to conserve this remarkable geological feature. The redwoods are home to a beautiful variety of wildflowers, from red and white trillium to yellow violets. If you look carefully, you might even catch a glimpse of the fragile calypso orchid. These pink blooms thrive in old-growth forests and flower in the spring. The stunning green backdrop to so many of these flowers is the redwood sorrel, or oxalis. The sorrel, with its trio of heart-shaped leaves, is a common sight on the floor of the redwood forests. It forms a rich organic carpet that makes these majestic trees appear to float on a sea of green. Tourists began coming to the redwoods in the 1800s, drawn by tales of tall trees that stretched almost to the sky. But getting there wasn't easy. In the early years, you could bounce across the rough trails, or you could take a ship from San Francisco and hope for calm seas. But with the invention of those newfangled automobiles, things began to change. Primitive roads began to take shape in Northern California during the early 1900s. But as more and more cars bounced through the groves and bogged down in them on a regular basis, they damaged the fragile soil and root systems. Soon, planners began building corduroy roads and other byways to take some of the stress off the trees and funnel sightseers onto more solid ground. In 1922, crews completed construction of one of America's great scenic routes, the Redwood Highway. Locals say the highway was built with pickaxes, shovels, yarders, and whiskey, and perhaps an eye for dollars, since tourist attractions sprung up almost as quickly as the trees. This is the land of roadside attractions, the interesting and downright unusual. Some, including some large burnt-out redwoods, became popular tourist spots and gift shops. There's the world-famous treehouse. It made Ripley's Believe It or Not back in the 1930s, when it was declared the world's tallest one-room house. Sure enough, the cavity inside the trunk reaches up 50 feet. That's a light bulb burning in the very top. The treehouse now sports a series of old-fashioned coin-operated attractions, from a logging camp scene to a classic carousel. Other trees have intact interiors, but enough interesting stuff on the outside to attract crowds. The grandfather tree is 265 feet high, 24 feet wide, and a 55-foot walk around. All sorts of limbs and branches have sprung from its massive trunk. And just a cone's throw away is a chance to get a little more close-up and personal with redwood. If you don't mind the noise. Some men work in clay, others in stone. Steve Anderson is a chainsaw artist. He starts with chunks of clear wood. They're salvaged from stumps at old logging sites.
Chainsaw carvings can be found all over the country. Very little of the raw material compares to redwood. From a production standpoint, from my standpoint, it's ideal because it's relatively soft and it's workable and the cuts go quickly and it's quite malleable. However, from the customer standpoint, the beauty of redwood is that it's one of the most stable and resilient woods there are to decay, so that you can put these things out of doors and they're not going to fall to pieces. Yeah, this is one of my favorite little carvings. It's a little teddy bear, and I'm going to hollow out a little pocket in here to set a house plant or to decorate with. The most intricate parts of these, of course, are the ears. So usually I'll try to get these fragile parts done first so I don't get the whole carving done and then end up wasting my time while losing an ear. So I'll usually get the finer details on first. The carving saws have a bit of a different point to their bar, which allows you to use the tip without it being quite so dangerous. So these are just little cuts with the tip of the saw. Been around cleaning out the ears, putting the little fur marks on, coming up here under the face is all possible with the chainsaw. After I've gone as far as I can with the chainsaw, I'll use a sander to sand it a bit smoother, and then for a little color here, I'll burn the nose, the paws, the pads on the bottom of the feet, and on something like a raccoon, I would also burn the eye face mask and stripes on the tail. The whimsical nature of these little animals are very well received. Kids, pets, oftentimes the animals bark at them thinking they're predators. Children are quite curious about them, but I think folks of all ages look at them and are they're more or less charmed by the whimsical character of them.
In the end, Steve has a nice carving and a whole lot of sawdust. Once you've made the drive to the Redwoods, why not try driving through the Redwoods? Over the years, some of the area's largest trees were turned into living tunnels. It might only run 20 feet, but adults and kids alike can get a kick out of pausing for a moment inside a redwood. There are 3 drive-through trees in the California Redwoods. This is the chandelier tree near the town of Leggett. It's 315 feet high, 21 feet across. But you'll want to swing in the side view mirrors if you're driving a sport utility vehicle or minivan. The opening is a cozy one, 6 feet wide and 6 feet 9 inches tall. But what a great experience for the kids, who can literally reach out and feel the heart of a redwood.
I touched it.
Going through for the first time was very cool. Very cool, being able to touch the sides of it. This is the first any of us have gone through at all, ever. We don't have any trees worth driving through at our house.
You can spot the sign for the tour through tree as you cross the Klamath River Bridge near the town of Klamath. Here, you can take a couple of loops through the Heartwood and even stop to sign the guest register. On the way out, there's the world's only log restroom, an unusual oasis of porcelain crafted in a single trunk. The Shrine drive-through tree is to the south of the community of Myers Flat. The redwood was first hollowed out by a wildfire, then widened years later to accommodate modern vehicles. Nature has thrown this tree all sorts of curves. Repeated floods by the nearby Eel River eroded the giant's roots, causing it to tilt a bit to the east. The locals put up some cables to stabilize things, and you have to admire the tree for its quirky charm. Once you've done the drive, the kids can explore the house carved into a nearby stump. The granddaddy of all redwood tourist attractions is Trees of Mystery, a few miles north of Klamath, California. Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox greet you at the entrance, literally.
Hi folks, how you doing?
These giant statues weigh close to 430,000 tons. Paul is 49 feet tall. Babe checks in at 35 feet. And the kids love to rush up and say, "Hello!"
Oh my goodness.
The attraction got its start in 1931 when it was dubbed Wonderland Park. You stroll through a hollow log onto the Trees of Mystery Trail. The graveled path is dotted with weirdly shaped trees and unusual redwood sculpture that tells the story of Paul Bunyan and other colorful characters from early logging days. Along the way, you can pause in the wildflower garden and listen to the relaxing sounds of the water wheel. Back in the main building, you can learn more about the region's native inhabitants and other American Indian tribes in the End of the Trail Museum. The local tribes were the first to live among the redwoods. White settlers began moving into the coastal redwoods in the 1800s. Those who homesteaded on prairies or cleared enough room often planted apple orchards or established dairies. Life was hard in these remote woods, but the great stumps provided natural picnic tables and dance floors or platforms for group photos. Over the next 100 years, towns flourished in the region, often crowded around the local mill. Some, like Dyerville, are a memory of the past. Others, like Weot, still remain. You pass through the communities on your drive through the redwoods. Maybe you'll even stop a spell. Enjoy some old-fashioned hospitality, the comfort of a rustic resort, and the feel of days gone by. Or if your taste is a little more cosmopolitan, you can head for some of the nearby cities. Each offers a unique charm and a chance to enjoy the local scenery. In Eureka and Ferndale, for example, it's a series of stunning mansions and storefronts. At the end of the day, you can enjoy the sunset over the Pacific, then head back inland to sleep beneath the redwoods and the stars. In the early 1900s, Joseph Strauss, the builder of the Golden Gate Bridge, wrote an ode to the redwoods. Here, sown by the Creator's hand, in serried ranks the redwoods stand. No other clime is honored so, no other lands their glories know. The greatest of earth's living forms, tall conquerors that laugh at storms. Their challenge still unanswered rings through 50 centuries of kings. The nation that with them were young, rich empires, with their forts far flung, lie buried now, their splendor gone. But these proud monarchs still live on. So shall they live when ends our day, when our crude citadels decay. For brief the years allotted man, but infinite perennial span. This is their temple, vaulted high, and here we pause with reverent eye, with silent tongue and awe-struck soul, for here we sense life's proper goal. To be like these, straight, true, and fine, to make our world like theirs, a shrine. Sink down, O traveler, on your knees. God stands before you in these trees.